What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 352 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about a Batman adjacent book. This is Azrael, like an angel in the dark. This collects the first 6 issues of what I believe was an ongoing Azrael series that was going on right around the time after Batman R.I.P. This is when Dick Grayson was Batman and Damian Wayne was his sidekick. This particular book is by Fabian Nicieza, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Ramon Box, and John Staniski. This book is about a new guy who is in the role of Azrael. If you know anything about Azrael, if you know about as much as I did before I read this book, basically Jean-Paul Valley, he was introduced shortly before the Nightfall storyline in a story called Sword of Azrael, I think was what it was, and basically he was created specifically to be a replacement Batman when Batman got his back broken in the Nightfall storyline. And then pretty much as soon as he put on the Batman costume, he went crazy, and then the whole story was about how these crazy, edgy vigilantes of the 90s were not a good thing. That was the whole purpose of the Nightfall story. And then after Nightfall, he stuck around. He stayed in Gotham City. He got his own series. I've read a few issues. He was kind of tangentially involved with the No Man's Land storyline, and that's about as much as I know about Azrael. I did not know that Jean-Paul Valley was not even part of this series. This has a new guy in the role of Azrael. It's a new organization that's backing Azrael. Usually, it's the Order of Dumas that is kind of the man behind the man, or the organization behind the man, if you will. In this book, it's the Order of Purity, and at one point we get some flashbacks showing one of the earlier Azraels, and apparently the Order of Purity is actually a spin-off of the Order of Saint Dumas, so they are connected to the previous Azrael somehow, but this book basically is this new guy trying to get a feel for being Azrael. He's in Gotham City. He's got his own personal problems. He's got a lot of personal problems. His brother and his sister-in-law were recently, actually, no, his brother and sister were recently killed. His sister-in-law, he has a very strained relationship with her. His handler, who I guess is, kind of like, I don't know, he works for the Order of Purity, but we don't really know what he does, but he's here, and apparently he does not entirely trust this Azrael guy. His name is Michael. I don't remember what his last name is. I don't even know if they gave his last name in this book, but his handler doesn't entirely trust him. He has orders that if anything happens, he is to kill Azrael, and apparently that is what has happened to most of the Azraels. I don't know if Jean-Paul Valley died. For all I know, he did. He's not a huge part of the Batman mythos. He's one of those guys, he stuck around in the 90s for a little while. I don't think anyone actually likes the character, so he could have died for all I know, and I wouldn't have known any different. But anyway, basically, all the Azraels go crazy because they wear this particular suit of armor, and eventually it starts speaking voices in their head, and they think it's the voice of God telling them what to do, and then the Order of Purity has someone kill off the Azrael, and that's what this guy is here for. This book is really interesting. I really like that it's part of the Batman world, but it's also very much trying to be its own thing. It's not firmly set in the world of Batman. In fact, there's just a few pages here where we see Batman take off his mask, and at one point, Damian calls him Grayson, and if it wasn't for that, I would have completely forgotten that this was set around the time when Dick Grayson was being Batman. I was kind of sort of keeping up with Batman comics when this series first started coming out, but I do not remember anything about this series when it was coming out. So it must have kind of stayed under the radar a little bit. I think it lasted a fairly, like 18 issues, something like that. I think there was about 3 trade paperbacks. The thing that, I don't know if it bothers me or if it's just something worth noting, but the thing about this book is that this is, I think, the first volume of this Azrael series, but it feels like it's volume 2 or 3. It feels like stuff has been going on for a little while with this character and his supporting cast, and it feels like I've missed something. It feels like I've been dropped into the middle of a movie. Now, there's one of two things that could have happened. These characters could have been introduced in one of the already going on Batman books of the time, and then they kind of got their own series in this Azrael book, or we could have had a 5 or 6 issue Azrael miniseries that ended, and then we got this ongoing series, because this is the first 6 issues of what I'm assuming is an ongoing series. So it's possible that we had an Azrael miniseries that came before this that kind of introduced all these characters, because when you get into the first issue of this book, it's a little confusing. It's kind of hard to keep up with all these new guys. It doesn't feel like this is their introduction to the DC Universe. This feels like they've been around for a little while, and I've missed their introduction. Also, one little problem that I had, it's mostly a problem at the beginning of the book. It's not not nearly as much of a problem the further you get into it. But at the beginning, this book does have a tendency to kind of jump around in time a little bit. It's showing stuff that happened 2 years ago, and then it's showing stuff that happens 6 months in the future. At one point, we see a character talking about someone who's dead, but then throughout the rest of the book, that character's not dead. It's a little bit like that Weapon X Days of Future Now book that I talked about a week or two ago, where it was just jumping around in time throughout the entire book, and it was impossible to keep up with what was going on in that book. This is not nearly as bad. It's just in the first issue where we're seeing stuff in the future. We're seeing Harvey Bullock interviewing this guy, interrogating this guy, and then we see that guy. He is actually a member of the police force, and he's kind of sort of a supporting character for this particular Azrael, and the rest of this book, I guess, is set sometime before that interrogation scene. It's a little confusing seeing that scene, and then I guess the rest of the series is leading up to that scene. It's going to be very interesting whenever I track down the other volumes of the series, seeing how it leads up to those events, and if those events actually do happen the way that this flash forward lets us think that they do, or maybe if there's something else going on. I kind of feel like there's something else going on. But I do like this book, and I don't want to compare it to Weapon X Days of Future Now. That is one of the worst graphic novels I've ever read. This book is actually really enjoyable. Just at the very beginning of this book, when it's jumping around in time a little bit, it did remind me of that. But after the first issue, it stopped doing that. It was a lot more linear. It was a lot more easy to understand. And I do feel like the further you get into this book, it is a little easier to keep up with all these characters because you've been reading these characters for a few issues now and you're starting to get the hang of them. But when you first jump in, it does take a little bit of getting used to these guys and figuring out who they are. And I'm curious if these characters, if they were introduced in some other book before this one. But anyway, I like this book quite a bit. I wasn't sure what I would think of it because Jean-Paul Valley, I'm kind of neutral on him. I know earlier I said nobody likes him, and he was only created basically to be a plot device, but I don't hate the character. I just don't really love him either. But I like this guy, and I like this world that this guy lives in. I like all these characters that surround him. Batman is here a little bit. If you don't like Batman, don't worry, he's not here that much. Now, if you absolutely cannot stand Batman, you might want to stay away from this book because he is here a little bit, but he's not taking over the book. He's here just enough to kind of lure in the Batman fans, I guess. But if you don't really care for Batman, but you can tolerate him a little bit, this might be a book that you want to check out. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Azrael, Angel in the Dark. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.